That was one of the nicest introductions I've ever had in my life. Thank you, Jacqueline. And to your mother, I love Ghana, and it looks like your son is going to make both countries proud. The Dean really spoke in the most powerful ways about welcoming everybody and congratulating everybody. And so I will leave that part. But what I want to say to all of you is how extraordinary it is to be here on this most amazing day, in this most incredible city, at this most extraordinary time in history. You guys represent the future because you already have signed up for lives of public service at a moment that we need it most. And as Jacqueline said, this has been my life, and so I really feel that I'm with my tribe today. And I couldn't be more proud, more honored to be with you. So here's to you. And the one thing I would add is that as you reflect on the friendships and the achievements that you've made, not only take time to pause on who you've become and who you want to be, but take time to say thank you, because one thing I've learned is that those are two of the most important words we can say. Jacqueline talked about leaving Wall Street at age 26 or 25 and moving to Rwanda. And I know that a lot of you have also taken real leaps of courage. But watching you and thinking about you today has really made me think about those times. I was actually loving the work of banking. I loved how numbers told a story. But what I didn't love was how the poor were excluded even from walking into the doors of the bank. And I hail from an immigrant family, and my grandmother, by all technical reasons, was poor. She never thought she was poor. And so by the time I was in my 20s, I had come to understand that poverty tells us nothing about a person's character. Poverty only tells us about their income levels. And so it didn't make sense to me. And that was really what propelled me to do a little research on the emerging sector of microfinance and then just move. I didn't wait. I found an opportunity in West Africa. I hit a series of roadblocks, big failures, and I didn't stop. I ended up through those mishaps in Rwanda, where I met a small group of women who wanted to do something about women's economic situation. And so I suggested we co-found the first microfinance bank in the country. And we did. And I learned that a small group of people, if they're focused on a common goal, can really make history in at least a small corner of the world. The work was super difficult. Lots of lonely nights, no shortage of tears. But more important, to learn what it means to reject a status quo is by definition going 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And yet, it also taught me that change is possible. That experience also gave me something that surprised me, courage. Because when I told my family and friends that I was leaving my career to move to a country very few people even could locate, they all told me I was crazy. And then when I went to Rwanda and started this microfinance institution, the community told me I was a little girl and I was definitely crazy. What I've learned since then is when people tell you crazy, that's often the best indication that you're probably on to doing something right. So get in the habit of doing something you fear. Remember that each time you practice courage, you gain courage. Think of it as a muscle you build for when you need it most. And right now, we need it most. In time, I also learned that my own successes and failures had much less to do with circumstance, structures, and systems, and more to do with character, my own and those around me. It was only when I learned to listen, not with the intention of convincing other people of my solutions, but with the intent to listen to what they had to say, to understand their perspectives, with the intent to change myself, that I started to succeed. And then for more than a decade after that experience, I continued what I would call a sort of apprenticeship. So if you sometimes wonder where you are in the path, just be in that place. Because the skills you build, the tools you amass, and probably most important, the leaders that you follow, whose actions show you the kind of person you want to be, help you build a toolbox for what you most need and want to do. Through that period, I came to understand that I was obsessed with the power of markets and the potential of philanthropy and government, but really I didn't understand why we started with those as ends in and of themselves rather than saw them as means to solve critical problems. And so when I started Acumen thinking we might revolutionize philanthropy, I came to understand very quickly that what we were really trying to do was change the underlying conditions so that we could ultimately make philanthropy not needed. As Giselle said, we started Acumen in 2001. And we invest what we call patient capital in entrepreneurs defined by their character. Men and women willing to go where markets and government have failed the poor. They're trying to solve the toughest problems that we face: healthcare and education, energy, and agriculture. And not only have we invested in more than 100 companies, but we've supported 450 young leaders around the world who are earlier in their trajectory. I can't imagine a better education than plunging into this world of investing social capital. Not only have I learned where markets and government do work and where they fail, but I've learned about sectors I didn't even know I wanted to learn about. Artificial insemination in the dairy cow industry, drip irrigation, solar microgrids, rice gasification to produce energy. But it's been extraordinary. But those are lessons for another day. Because when I have stepped back after these 17 years, I've recognized that what separates the solutions that succeed from those that fail go back to what I learned as a young person. They have very little to do with the systems and the structures, whether we're in a stable country or a post-conflict area. They have everything to do with character. And conversely, when I look at our failures, almost always it's because of a lack of character or a flaw in character. It might be an entrepreneur that does what's easy rather than what's right. Or they lack the resilience to stay the road, or what we would call the moral imagination, to be truly curious about the people they are serving. The kind of character that leads to success can be summed in 2 words: moral leadership. Moral because right now, more than any time in history, we need leaders who are more focused on other people, on making change than they are themselves. And leadership because the world has changed radically for your generation. No longer can we focus on a single bottom line, whether it be profit or an ideology, but we've got to recognize what it will take in a highly complex world to solve the problems. We can't depend on profit. We must focus on stakeholders. Our problems demand nothing less from us. And because there is no roadmap, developing moral leadership requires a compass, one that points to the flourishing of all human beings if we really want a world of dignity. And that is for this generation to help us understand how to do, and I believe there is no generation like you who can do it. But I thought that while there are many points on this compass, I would share just 4. First, what we need to do as moral leaders is redefine success. The zero-sum model of I win, you lose cannot sustain an interdependent world in which we all rise and fall together. Instead, we need brave individuals driven by a new metric, one that looks at success based not just on the wealthy fare, but on how the poor and the vulnerable are included. Sam Goldman was working as a Peace Corps volunteer in Benin when his neighbor's kerosene lantern tipped over and burned down the house and nearly killed the eldest son. That was a moment that Sam woke up and realized that 1.5 billion people on this planet have no access to electricity. They live in the dark 130 years after Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. And so he decided to do something. He didn't wait. Now, he didn't even have an engineering degree, but when he went to business school, he met his partner, Ned Tozum, and he did. And together they designed this $30 solar lantern. Their business plan was really a lot of assumptions. We invested in them anyway. And what we didn't understand then was that these guys not only had to figure out how to build a company, they had to create a new market that didn't exist. That's hard. It took more than a decade of experiments, of failures, countless hours spent listening to customers, changing products to meet their needs. Sam and Ned spent many years earning very little money, raising a lot of money, partnering with companies, trying out solutions that often failed. And in truth, there were many times where they weren't sure they were going to succeed, and I wasn't sure either. But I would remind myself that we were on board because we'd bet on these guys to take on the resilience, not on their business plan, but on the fact that they would never quit. Change takes time. Sometimes young people tell me what they're going to do in the next 3 years, and once they've done it, then they're going to move on to the next thing. And I shake my head. And I'm tempted to show them a picture of Sam and Ned when they started D-Light. They were grad students, just graduated like you guys, and they were young and hip, and they had full heads of hair. And now it's been more than a decade. And they're still incredibly youthful, big smiles, really hopeful, and completely bald. I'm just saying. And yet, because they dared, those two young men and their teams have brought light and increasingly electricity to 82 million people. They're just getting started. A new industry has been built. That is success. They are lighting the world. Second, moral leadership requires building muscles of moral imagination, and this is an amazing moment for that. It means having the audacity to imagine the world that could be and the humility to see it as it is. A humble audacity, if you will. Emily Stone was working in an environmental firm when she came upon the fact that the $100 billion chocolate industry is actually fueled by 5 million smallholder farmers, 90% of whom make less than $2 a day, many of them living in indentured servitude. Now, Emily likes chocolate a lot, but she loves justice. She's an amazing woman and decided that she was going to start a company, but she was going to ignore the price of the global commodities price and figured, well, the retailers who are selling premium chocolate for $12 a day ignore the price that we pay to the farmers. So maybe we can imagine a new business model altogether. So she works with smallholders. She understands their production costs, and then she negotiates a fair margin, which is sometimes 2 to 3 times what the global commodities prices are. The negotiations are difficult because she also promises full transparency through the supply chain, so everyone from the purchasers to the farmers understand the pricing. It's been difficult, but what she's done that is most important for you is to build a community of trust. The farmers are moving out of poverty and they are building their own agency. The chocolate companies are getting the highest quality chocolate they have gotten. We have a new model for how we might redefine capitalism. Third, moral leadership requires the skill of building partnership, sometimes across truly uncomfortable lines. It has been so thrilling for me not only to work with entrepreneurs around the world, but also in the United States, entrepreneurs that refuse to be boxed in by working simply in government or in the private sector or in civil society. A 20-something, young 20-something doctor named Manik Bhatt started a company called Healthify, a for-profit platform that could actually connect the health insurance companies with government, with social workers, with low-income people themselves. His insight was that if we could look at every low-income person as a whole person, and then use the technology, the platform, to link their social workers to all the different services, we could really reduce the costs that health insurance is right now bearing. He's had to learn the language of medicine, markets, policy, the poor, and he's done so brilliantly. Remember that name, Healthify, because I think it will be another model for how we bridge left and right in this country and start to remind ourselves that together we can solve our toughest problems. But we have to get used to the moral leadership quality of building uncomfortable alliances. Finally, moral leadership requires holding two contradictory ideas and rejecting neither. This is a massive challenge for our generation, especially in this age of rapid-fire response on social media, where nuance is rarely rewarded. We move too quickly to outrage and blame. It is as if I cannot be right unless I prove you wrong, or just say you're wrong. But a winner-takes-all society strips us of our individual humanity. It diminishes us, enabling a vulgar laziness with language that divides and shames and too often humiliates. The real winners are cynicism and fear, and there are no greater allies of the status quo than those two. At Acumen, as I said, in addition to investing in companies, we invest in young leaders. And we try to give them tools to transcend lines of difference. And so last year, when there was so much conflict over Kashmir, our Indian fellows, separately from our Pakistani fellows, each were feeling frustrated that they were only having conversations about what was happening with one another. And so they dared to have a conversation across national lines, using technology again, having a Skype conversation. And the conversations were nervous-making, they were uncomfortable, they were awkward and difficult. But because they dared, they also found their best selves in these conversations. And one of our Indian fellows was so proud that he put a screenshot of the conversation on Facebook. And for that, he was rewarded within the next minutes of a barrage of hate, including from many of his so-called friends. It got worse when he went home and saw his parents, who expressed their deep disappointment in him. They said, you know, it was bad enough that you decided to become a social entrepreneur, but now you're consorting with the enemy. So you have to make a decision. Are you a patriot? Are you part of this family? Or are you with them? And after the experience, he wrote me and he said, can I be a patriot and also a global citizen? It's one of the biggest questions of our time. Of course you can. Of course we must. We can love our countries and at the same time be curious about other places and other peoples, other nations. Most important, we can learn from them. We can share what's best that we have to offer. We can hold on to a strong sense of identity without presuming that the wounds of our own past are no more legitimate than the wounds of another's. Being a patriot and a global citizen should be mutually reinforcing. But don't be tricked by language, because that's another big trap for this generation. The Indian fellow's parents weren't speaking about patriotism. They were speaking about nationalism. That is an entirely different kettle of fish. Nationalism is an arrogant love of country based on notions of us and them, blaming others to justify one's own superiority. And in an interdependent world in which we all rise and fall together, it no longer serves. Patriots love their country with a sense of duty to seek its betterment, including having the hard conversations. It includes renewing our values and confronting what it will take to lead to a better place. Patriots see themselves as part of a greater whole. An either-or world limits our chances for shared humanity. In our interdependent world, we must reject false polarities, for there is a space that connects love of country and love of world, that bridges left and right, and that goes beyond shallow judgments of right and wrong. The opportunity, indeed the imperative of moral imagination, of moral leadership, is to create a set of values, principles, and possibilities in which we can all see ourselves. That requires navigating the contradictions, holding them. Your generation also has the chance to drop the excess baggage carried by mine. But don't jettison everything, for there is great wisdom in our histories. Seek it out. It is to you to learn to carry forward what is most beautiful from the past and have the courage to let go of that which no longer serves. As I've said, the work of change is not easy, but you know that already. You're at Wagner because you have signed up to embrace the difficult, to serve. And I promise you, if you focus on developing your character and not your career only, if you practice the principles of a leadership focused on the world and not simply yourselves, you will find a richness and joy in the privilege of being part of the greatest questions of our times. 30 years after starting this work, I finally understand at a visceral level what Martin Luther King spoke about when he used the phrase, the beautiful struggle. For the work is hard, it can be bitter at times, but when you get through, even in the smallest moments, you find a beauty not only in the world, but in yourself. I have found the deepest soulful connection to my own humanity as I have connected and learned about others' humanity. And maybe the biggest gift is the older I get, the more I see beauty in everything. And so if there's one thing I leave with you today, it's this. The world needs you to be the leaders and foot soldiers of a moral revolution. Leave the Wagner School with a sense of confidence in what you have learned, with each other to accompany you, and with what you know, but with responsibility too. Because if you dared to act with moral leadership, I believe with my entire soul that you can be the best generation this world has ever seen. You can imagine and build the frameworks and the institutions that make the world more inclusive, less wasteful, more sustainable, more loving. It's up to you because you have the tools and the skills, everything that you need. And your promise, our promise, is nothing less than a world in which every human being is able to flourish. For if I have learned one thing in my life, it is that we do not get dignity as a human species until every one of us has dignity. And so I wish you Godspeed and good luck. And today, an amazing celebration for who you are, what you bring, what you will do. Here's to the class of 2018.